Hello, and welcome to another episode of Second Gen's Liberated Panda live with your co-host Jason and me, Angel.
Today, Angel and I will be discussing Chinese hackers compromising dozens of American government agencies and various defense contractors. Also, who did the Chinese hack, how, and what information did they possibly obtain?
Plus, Jason and I will be talking about America's role in Ukraine as Ukraine faces the biggest military buildup of Russian forces on its border in nearly a decade.
But first, let's go over one of the major highlights of the news this week. It was very hard to miss the verdict of the Derek Chauvin case. For those of you in our audience can recall, now former officer Chauvin was a police officer who knelt on George Floyd's neck until he died. So what's going on with it, Angel?
All right, so finally, the nation can breathe a collective sigh of relief because Derek Chauvin was found to be guilty of second-degree murder, third-degree manslaughter, second-degree manslaughter, and in Minneapolis for the George Floyd incident that happened in March of last year. So
you said, hold on, wait. You said second-degree murder, third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter, right?
Correct.
All right. So not all of our guests know what each one of those crimes mean. Could you maybe extrapolate that a little bit? Like what?
Sure.
So I know first-degree murder is if it's a premeditated crime. So if you're a contract killer, right? Like you say, hey, Jason, go murder somebody for me. I'm going to pay you $50,000. I'd be guilty of first-degree murder. They talked about in the trial that and then you have second and third degree murder below that, and then you have the various manslaughters. Second degree manslaughter, I know that they talked about at the trial was if you, and I know I'm going out of order, I'm sorry. Second degree manslaughter was if you are, like he failed to get help. So like he kneeled on his neck so long that he didn't properly get help like he should have because he's an officer and it's his job to assist somebody who's like in distress. So I think then second degree murder, right, would be a crime of passion. Is that right?
So that's actually a very interesting question, Jason, and I'm very glad you asked that. So first degree murder, second degree murder, manslaughter, voluntary or involuntary is different in every single state. So it's interesting that you brought up what your definition of first degree murder is. In New York, first degree murder only applies if you murder a police officer. So bizarre. It's strange.
New York's a weird state. What can I say?
Yeah, well, every state has their own definition of first degree murder and second degree murder, but usually it goes a little bit something like this. So first degree murder, like I said, every state's different, but if we were to kind of mush everything together and come to like a consensus,
premeditated, right? So you planned on, like I planned on murdering somebody or I hired somebody to murder someone.
Right.
That's first degree.
Right.
Second degree is unplanned, but still malicious.
Well, in many states, first degree murder would be stuff like bombs, right? Like something that can cause mass casualties. So that would be first degree murder. And then second degree murder is what you're thinking of, premeditated murder.
But like Casey Anthony wasn't where the husband murders a wife. Isn't that first degree? I think they're in Florida. So wasn't that first degree because he planned on doing it?
Yes. So in Florida, first degree murder, that's what it is. So I know that's very confusing, but let's just to make it simple, let's just say first degree murder, second degree murder. If you're on the hook for that, it's bad because your sentencing is going. And since you've asked, since we're on the topic of sentencing, if Derek Chauvin's legal team does not appeal the case or the appeal gets denied, then in 8 weeks, there will be a sentencing trial, a separate trial. And in that case, Derek Chauvin will be sentenced for his crime of second degree murder because that is the highest and most serious crime that he's committed. And that's how Missouri law works. So that has a
Minnesota, but that does not carry death. So he
does not carry death.
He would not get a death sentence.
You're right.
For sure, 100%.
Right. So right now, 40 years is the maximum. But per my legal experience, because he has no priors, I'm going to go with a confident 15 years. And you know how our justice system works. You go into jail for 15 years, and after 7 years, you get parole. So really, it's 7 years, right? So it's something in that ballpark. But at least he got convicted. So hallelujah, something's finally happened. Because as we all know, cops, police officers, they have qualified immunity. And just as a refresher, qualified immunity means that police officers get to be protected by the law, even when they sometimes step over what is reasonable for a regular civilian like Jason and me, and you guys in the audience.
Right. I mean, the flip side is that police officers are constantly getting in life and death situations every single day. I mean, how many times we hear on the news, traffic stops, some guy pulls a gun, shoots the police officer. Maybe not everybody hears about it, but it's on the news, right? At least local news. And that happens maybe not every day, but every week, every month. So, you know, it is kind of what it is. Right. Personally, I think we both agree they should have some form of qualified immunity. But the fact of the matter is whether or not, you know, they deserve it in every instance is another story. This instance, I happen to agree with Angel. I'm not a lawyer. 15 years. I mean, he's not going to get the max because he doesn't have any priors. I doubt the judge is going to come down hard. The flip side of it is that he can still appeal, I believe, the sentencing. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So they have 90 days to appeal.
Right.
But
90%. He will appeal.
Right. 90% of appeals get rejected. So that's why I'm saying it doesn't look good.
So it doesn't look good, right? But one thing that the judge did mention, although he was spurred on by Chauvin's legal team, which was very interesting, LA Representative Maxine Waters decided to fly from DC to Minnesota to talk about how the jury needs to convict him, or else, you know, consequences could happen. That was widely seen as jury tampering. And that was mentioned in the trial. It was brought up by Chauvin's attorney, which was interesting because it wasn't brought up by the judge. So Chauvin's attorney put that out there for the jury, which then the judge picked up on, which could be a good or not good move by the judge. But then President Joe Biden mentioned something about making the right decision, and the mayor of Minneapolis, where it occurred, said something similar. So you have public officials, high ranking public officials really passing judgment before judgment's due, depending on how you look at it. I know Chauvin's attorney said that they thought that that was kind of jury tampering. The judge did mention, though, that could be a grounds for a mistrial. So after Representative Maxine Waters' comments, he did say that I urge public officials not to comment, and then Biden and the mayor both commented, which, I mean, that was kind of a, you know, open mouth insert foot, as a lot of Americans like to say, type of comment. You probably shouldn't have done that.
Right. But so maybe there's a potential for mistrial. And if there is, that 10% likelihood of getting a mistrial and appeal, we'll update you guys on that. But in the meantime, unless you have other things we want to say about the Derek Chauvin case, Jason.
Did you think it was right? Did you think it was right that he got on all three?
Absolutely. I think it was absolutely decided right. And if it went the other way, I wouldn't have been surprised either, but I would have been very disappointed. And, you know, it would have just, like, I don't know, it would just put so little faith in the justice system if he were to get away.
Right. There's really no other way, though. Like, he wasn't going to go 0 for 3 and get ruled innocent on all three. Right. The manslaughter was a home run. I mean, that was obvious. There's no way. He's calling for help. Everybody's saying get an ambulance. It's a cop's job to do it. He was going to get convicted at bare minimum manslaughter, right? He came in and he offered to plead guilty to third-degree murder, which means they probably thought he was guilty or could be guilty of second degree, but thinking he was a cop, I plead guilty to third degree. Leniency, I get out in like 5 years.
Right.
It is what it is. Maybe I went on appeal because some politician says something because it's a highly politicized case. Who would ever think that would happen, right? Well, it did. Right. But, you know, so I think that they kind of knew that they could have possibly been found guilty of second. I thought an interesting point by Andrew McCarthy from National Review, who's on Fox a lot. He is right-leaning. But he did mention, he goes, in the case of jury tampering, Chauvin's attorney wouldn't have much of a case if they only found him guilty of third-degree murder and manslaughter. But the fact that they found him guilty of all three gave them the case for tampering, because a judge or appeals judges could say, hey, they didn't find you guilty of all charges, so how could you say that it was tampered with by Maxine Waters threatening or Joe Biden threatening or whatever? But now that he's guilty of all three, it kind of opens it up. So maybe it would have been a safer bet to just be guilty of third and, max sentence on the third. I don't know. Once again, I'm not a lawyer. That's your
Right. So, and I think they did exactly what the right thing was, and try to just pin the highest, most severe murder on him, because if they can't get him for that, then they could get him for the one below and one below. So, you can't get more than what you asked for. So I think the prosecution did an excellent job. But moving on from the story and moving to a story from way, way far from here, turning to another highlight of the week before another major highlight coming to you from 181 million miles from Earth. I'm talking about Mars. So Jason, have you heard about this Mars helicopter? Rose into the air above Mars surface yesterday on Monday. So what is the big deal all about this?
I mean, we're flying vehicles on other planets. That's crazy. Right?
Yeah.
The amount, let's just break it down. The world kind of gradually progressed up until about 1860. And then from there, technology took a, all pun intended, moonshot very quickly up, or I guess, up, to the point where now we're piloting drones on other planets. Like just think about it for a second, right? How many people's parents were born when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, right?
Right.
But weren't even born. Mine weren't. Mine was 16 watching. So.
Right. So very cool. Now that we've got the highlights out of the way, we can talk about our main story, right? So go ahead, Jason.
All right. So Angel, big deal. This isn't new. It's been happening for a while. Computer technology, everything's wired to the internet. It's just inevitable. Somebody's going to hack someone. And when we're talking about world powers, and we are at it again. China is hacking the U.S. system again. Not the first time, not the last time. It's going to keep happening. So what's going on there? What's happened this week? Because it's in the news again.
Right. Okay. So coming right off the heels of Russia cyber attacking US, we have China cyber attacking US, right? So they've really stepped up their cyber game, and it makes me wonder whether America even has a game plan to counter these attacks. So let me give our audience the details on the latest China hacking of the US system. We're learning that at least 2 groups of China-linked hackers have spent months using a previously undisclosed vulnerability in American and European VPN, which is short for virtual private networking devices to spy on the US defense industry.
So VPNs are something I know there's people out there that use them in other countries, right? Like yes. I can say that I am in, I use this sometimes to say I'm in Italy. If I want to get something from European or the UK, I'll say I'm in London and I connect to a server in London, which then bounces to the site I want to, but it keeps my home address, my home IP private. So for those of you who don't know what VPNs are, I know we have some audiences from around the world and they might know, they might not, but that's kind of how it is. So and hackers typically use VPNs. Sorry to interject there.
No worries. Actually, thank you so much for explaining what VPNs are to our audience. So you're absolutely right. It's like this, the software that you can put on your phone and it makes your IP private and it can look like it's from anywhere, right? So if you're in America, you can make it bounce off of Australia, like you said. So, so the Chinese discovered a vulnerability in our VPN. And this is information according to the private cybersecurity firm called FireEye, working with the federal government and their subcontractor for the federal government. So what's worse are these cyber intrusions are ongoing by China. This is just one of the latest attacks in a series of disturbing trends. Hence the name of our show today, History Repeats Itself, because China hacking US isn't new. So do we know who hacked China and what information they obtained?
It's interesting, right?
Yeah. Right. So China hackers spied on for months on dozens of high value government, defense, industry, and financial sector targets in the US and in Europe. So we are told that China has breached sensitive defense companies. Which ones in particular, we don't know of yet. It's probably a security reason. We don't know that. The issue is that, like we mentioned, there were flaws in the VPN used by employees to access their company while they were working remotely during this last year during COVID. And I'm sure before COVID too, they were also working remotely, but more so during COVID. The specific VPN in question here in this latest hack of many, many hacks is called Pulse.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because a lot of the VPNs, they can still you can mask stuff, but you can still kind of trace it. Our government I always operate under the assumption that if the government tells us they have specific resources, they probably have resources that are like 3 steps above that, right?
I sure hope so.
Yeah, I know. They should, right? It's defense secrets.
Right.
So if they're not telling us they have hypersonic missiles, and China and India and Russia does, we probably have hypersonic missiles. They're telling us they don't have space weapons. They probably have space weapons. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I mean, I like to dabble in the fact that it could be true, but let's be real. You and I, we all know it. They got to keep those secrets to keep us safe, within reason, right? But I think it's interesting because I know during the election in 2016, we always talked about Hillary Clinton and her server gave a lot of stuff up to the Chinese, right? The popular thought was the F-35, the Joint Strike Fighter now that's used by the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines. Tons of countries have, second, third, fourth line ones. But it's probably the most popular fighter jet in the world, and it is, and the prevailing, I guess, conspiracy theory or thought was that the Chinese gained access to her server, and she had the information on the JSF on there, and it got to the Chinese that way. But the Chinese actually did hack I think it was Lockheed who had it, right? There was a popular hack of Lockheed for the Joint Strike Fighter, I believe it was, at that time, or they hacked somebody for the Joint Strike Fighter, and that's how they got their now they have a stealth fighter that's somewhat similar, right?
Right.
It's not the first time, and it's not going to be the last time, right? That's China's MO. They hack.
Right. Right. And go ahead.
No, it's so bad because you look at it, right? And Chinese policy for American companies are, if you want to operate on our soil, we need to own 50% of you, your Chinese operations.
Yeah.
So that even tells you, they are so interested in our intellectual property. They don't even care about the hard stuff. They want the knowledge. And so, hacking is right up that alley. That's how you get it, right? So
exactly. And so speaking of history repeating itself, just last month, China hacked Microsoft, encompassing 60,000 organizations and at least 280,000 users worldwide who use Microsoft Exchange for their email. I do use Microsoft Exchange for work. Do you, Jason?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's, a lot of us use it. So it was hacked between February 26th and March 3rd of 2021, this year. And we discovered an operation that rendered hundreds of thousands of small businesses, schools, and their organizations to vulnerable to be the Chinese hacking. So what do you think the next move is for us, Jason, in terms of getting ahead of this hacking game? Because it feels like we're getting hacked. Is it because they're getting hacked and we're not hearing about it, or we're just asleep at the wheel?
What came first, the chicken or the egg, right? You know what's funny? If you remember the Edward Snowden releases in about, what was that, 7 years ago now? God, it's 2021.
Gosh, maybe more.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Edward Snowden was forever ago, 7 or so years ago. One of the things he mentioned in there that I think people looked at and said, wow, that's so interesting, and then everyone forgot about it, was the fact that our CIA, our NSA, or our CIA, I should say, can make a hack look like it's China or look like it's Russia or anyone else. And everybody's viewing, like we talk about the Russia hack of the elections and everything else. They're viewing that in a very singular focus, like, oh, it was Russia. Oh, it was this. Oh, it was that. Without understanding that, like, our CIA can make it look like it's Russia. So I look at that and people say, like, oh, the 2016 election was hacked. And you're like, they were like, it was hacked by Russia. Like, well, how do you know it's by Russia? Because their fingerprints are on there. And you're like, well, are they? You're like, because we can make their fingerprints. So if we can make their fingerprints, what makes you think that it was really them? Unless if you know one way or the other. So either you're trying to deceive us or you're not trying to deceive us, but I can't trust you anyway, right?
That's
because
interesting.
You did that to begin with.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it probably is China hacking. I doubt it's a domestic hack, but
So it's interesting that you bring this up because they were actually in the newspaper articles that I was reading and doing research for this segment. They were saying that they know it's China because they see a lot of Chinese characteristics of this hacking. So it kind of goes along to what you're saying. Like, how do you know who it is if it's someone pretending to be someone else? Like, how certain can we be? Maybe we know, we're just not giving it away, right?
Right. But I mean, you don't think we have native Chinese speaking computer nerds hacking stuff? I mean, how many people out there, how many Chinese people don't like the CCP, right? And would love to hack their stuff? That now decide I'm going to work for the good guys, the American government, let's say, right? I'm going to work for the other side. You know, it's true. It's true.
We hope there's more of them.
I know, right? All of them. I hope they all give it all away, to be honest. But hey, it is what it is. But yeah, I mean, I'm always skeptical when this stuff happens, just because you don't, like, we don't know what we don't know. I know that's a famous phrase. I think it was what did Walter Mondale say that, or someone else? We don't know.
No, but I know what you mean, though.
Yeah, we don't know what we don't know, and that's what's scary about it. We do know some stuff. We know that we can cover up. We can make a hack look Chinese. We know the Chinese hacks us. We know they have a reason to hack us, and that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, so it seems like we're kind of at an impasse, and I'm looking forward to what Joe Biden has to bring forth to the Senate floor. I hear there's going to be a bill coming out, and I didn't get a chance to really do a lot of research on it because it's so new, but it has major bipartisan support, and it is out just to address how U.S. can compete effectively with China. So I'm so excited about this, and I can't wait for it to come out. I think it's like 298 pages. I'll read it and get back to you guys next week on what's on it, because we definitely need a cohesive policy to fight China. And finally, hopefully we're getting one. And yay, it's bipartisan, right? One of the only, right? It's like one of the only bipartisan issues left in DC these days. So
you think there's a lot of drama though surrounding Joe Biden and Hunter and China. So, you know, the Republicans say that, you know, he's very pro-China. He's making a lot of moves that make it seem like that's not true. So we all, you know, hopefully, fingers crossed, right? Like it's true, and he's going to punch him in the face. But, you know, it is bipartisan, which is important.
Right.
I'm very hopeful to see it. You love reading long documents, though, so you'll give us a great synopsis.
Yeah, definitely. But
you are okay.
I mean, I could talk all day long about it because I'm so excited. We're finally doing something. And I by the way, I think Biden's still doing a pretty good job. But I know
I think he's doing better with China than what I thought he would, for sure. Mm-hmm. Our next story, we're going to find out about Russia.
Yep.
And the Russian aggression, and I think that there's a gap there that we could close.
Absolutely. So moving on to our other big story of today is Russia's continuing aggressive stance against the West. In this case, it's Crimea at issue again. So Jason is here again. So history just repeats itself, keeps repeating itself, like our title says. So Jason is here to tell us all about what's going on with Russia and Ukraine and why we should care.
And as a side point, remember, if you thought COVID was new, it's not. The Spanish flu in 1917, right? Same thing. We all wore masks and social distance as well. Very similar. Anyway, so nothing is new. Nothing you experience in this world is new, okay? Clear test of the Biden administration's mettle. Russia's picked up its aggressive stance towards Ukraine once again. So let's go back in time to 2014 when this first occurred.
What happened in 2014?
Yes, the days with the relations with Russia at that point was not so thorny. Barack Obama had just won a second term 2 years earlier in 2012. It wasn't the midterm elections yet in November. It was still early 2014. So in 2012, Obama won, kind of close, not nearly the margin he won in 2008. Democrats held the Senate again. Republicans held the House. So his self-proposed mandate to lead really wasn't existent anymore. And right before that election, Obama was caught on a hot mic talking to then the Russian puppet president, Dmitry Medvedev, saying, quote, "I'll have more flexibility after the election," to which Medvedev said, "I'll transmit this message to Vladimir," meaning Putin, who would later become president. It's better said in a Russian accent. Who would Putin was president from Russia, I think, 2008, and then he took a 4-year term off where his PM, Prime Minister Medvedev, took power, and then he came back. I think it got around some rules, or at least looked better. But he came back in 2012 for a third term. So in early 2014, Ukraine's always been a flashpoint, right? Ever since the old Soviet Union broke up in the early 1990s, Ukraine was always kind of that gateway, really, between the East and the West in terms of Eastern Europe and Western Europe. It was Eastern Europe for a long time, but it gradually started moving more towards the European Union and NATO. In early 2014, then Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych negated on signing a deal to open Ukraine up to the Eurozone. So basically all the European Union countries and some other nations like Iceland are all kind of in the Eurozone, the European community, a cooperation of European countries with similar immigration, trade rules and stuff. And so he was kind of starting to open Ukraine up to the Eurozone of influence, right? We talk about the NATO influence, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is the US and a lot of the NATO countries, along with Turkey. They kind of face the Eastern Bloc of the Russian influences. And so Ukraine was kind of moving more from like a Eastern European to more of a Western European kind of sphere of influence, as they call it. So Yanukovych basically negated on signing a deal. He said he was going to do it, and he didn't do it. There were a lot of protests in Ukraine, and he was eventually ousted in 2014. So over time that year, it resulted in Russian soldiers acting as mercenaries. Basically, what they did, they took their Russian flag patch off their jackets, and they were just unnamed soldiers, like pure, or not even mercenaries, just unnamed soldiers, renegades, I guess you'd call it. They moved into different areas, Donbas and Crimea areas in eastern Ukraine, which was met by universal condemnation by basically everybody, right?
Yeah. So I was going to say, what was the reaction by the international community?
So those areas, they're basically seen as a Russian takeover, right? In those areas in Ukraine. And what happened is Russia eventually did annex those areas. So basically they claimed it as their own. And they forced, I don't know how much, because we don't know what happens there now that they're kind of taken by Russia. They forced a referendum, meaning a vote, which was obviously approved to become part of the Russian Republic again. Russia kind of accepted them back. February 2015, they met and they had a peace deal in Minsk in Belarus, and that peace deal basically kind of granted those rebellious regions an end to hostility, or between the two countries, Ukraine and Russia, end to hostility. But they kind of gave those rebellious regions autonomy from Ukraine, which Russia kind of won that. I mean, think about it, right? You invade these areas then like become part of your country, and then you go to Europe at large, right? You get a peace deal saying these areas have to self-govern from Ukraine, and then these areas are basically part of Russia now because you won that. So
this is what kills me. I'm sorry, just to interject. This is what kills me about Russia and China being on the Security Council, permanent Security Council chairs in the UN, because they're constantly doing stuff like this, right? Russia and China, they're constantly claiming territories that aren't theirs and just, kind of flouting international rules. And here they are sitting on the Security Council and they're vetoing like things that everyone else wants. So that really upsets me.
You're right. A couple points. So Security Council is a misnomer. they're the Security Council because they're the big players in global politics, right?
Right.
You have to separate the random mishmash of the UN where everybody gets a vote from the so-called elites or the largest nations that really keep the globe secure because of their spheres of influence. That's a Security Council. So what you're talking about, yes, Russia not secure, right? People could make the argument that the U.S. does not keep the world secure in many ways, and I could agree with them on that. We have plenty of warts as well. But the fact of the matter is that these are all the big countries. So should they be on there? Yeah, they probably should. It's not as bad as like Saudi Arabia being on the Women or the Human Rights Council. That's an aberration. We won't go there. But one thing about Russia, they claim that it was a lot of ethnic Russians that lived in that region, which is not entirely untrue. The Crimea is very interesting though, and it's very muddy because the Crimea was taken from the Ottoman Empire, so the Turks, in 1783 by Tsarina Catherine the Great. Very popular name in history. One thing that's very important about that area is that Sevastopol, one of the major cities in the Crimea, is a deep water port. Okay, so after the 1856 Treaty of Paris, ending the Crimean War between the English and the French and the Russian czars at that time, they agreed to dismantle the port because it was seen Russia has their ships in the Baltic, they have it in Murmansk in the Arctic, and then they also have ships in the Black Sea. Their ports in the Black Sea do not have they're not deep water. So submarines, larger warships can't really operate in those ports the same way. Deep water ports are very important, very, very important for a lot of global spheres of influence. And this was also important because it's on the other side of Europe. So in order to get to the Mediterranean, would you rather go from the Arctic the whole way around, or just be in the Black Sea and just cut down through through the states? I think Straits of Hormuz, right? Through by Istanbul. So for them, it was very important to have it. And so it's always been the apple of their eye to have Crimea.
You mean Russia, right? It's always been Russia. Crimea has always been Russia's candy of Russia's eye. Oh, gotcha.
Well, so after they took it over, they really wanted to Russify it, so they moved the ethnic Tartars out of Crimea, who were an Islamic Turkish sect, and they moved in ethnic Russian. So Crimea is ethnically Russian. Historically speaking, no, but in the last 150 years, I mean, technically yes, but they kind of made it that way.
So we only have 2 minutes, 2 minutes left. So I just want to know, what's going on right now over there.
Oh yeah, of course. So right now, what's going on is we have the Russian Republic, so Putin, amassing troops on the Ukrainian border. He has every right to put troops wherever the heck he wants in his country. Okay, but it is seen as a sign of aggression. Russia did take over those areas in the Ukraine. After that happened, Ukrainian President Zelensky has recently stepped up efforts to curtail influence with Russia-aligned politicians in Ukraine. So one problem in Ukraine, in America, we have the Democrats and the Republicans, and we've often not even it's not even that we're two sides of the same coin. We're seen on different sides of the universe sometimes, right? But in Ukraine, you really have two spheres of influence. You have a Russian aligned sphere of influence and a Western aligned sphere of influence. And so Zelensky is more Western. And so he was trying to rid Ukraine of Russia aligned spheres of influence politicians. So that's an issue. Putin didn't like that because he wants to have some influence there. So a lot of oil czars that have influence, or oil czars, oof, a lot of their
complicated
oligarchs that have influence as their god. They feel like czars sometimes.
Seriously.
But also, Ukraine has talked about joining NATO. There's talks about joining the EU. Kind of pie in the sky, but still. Moscow is also attempting to pressure Ukraine. There's an issue with water supplies to Crimea, and Ukraine cut off water supplies, and Russia doesn't like it. I mean, it's a stability issue. You think gold's important? Water's important, just like that James Bond movie that they had a few
water is way more important than gold.
Water's so important. That's the next great influence. So Putin's trying to put some pressure on it, but also I think, Biden's the new president. He's trying to, He's trying to get in his face and see what he's going to do, honestly.
So what happened on the call between Biden and Putin last week, Jason?
Right. So Biden called on the Russian president to de-escalate tensions. The Russian president definitely rebuffed that, saying it really wasn't his thing. It sure was a fun phone call. I mean, Biden blames Putin for many of the U.S.'s recent election issues. I mean, look at the Mueller probe, which, I mean, didn't really find any significant Russian influence directly tied to Putin. So, I mean, it's interesting. He keeps kind of riding that one. But last Thursday, the U.S. announced new sanctions on Russia, banning American financial institutions to buy Russian government bonds directly. They also expulsed or kicked out 10 Russian diplomats and 32 other Russian nationals for supposedly attempting to interfere with the 2020 elections now. The popular SolarWinds hack, he officially attributed that to Russia, which honestly, I mean, who knows? We don't know that right now. The White House has denounced Moscow for offering Taliban bounties to U.S. troops in Afghanistan. I mean, honestly, that was proven untrue months ago before Trump even left office.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
That was proven. Yeah, the Department of Defense said that that's untrue. That was just a rumor started by the New York Times, which is crazy because if you start having foreign policy based off rumors, I mean, you're going to get yourself in trouble. You're going to get soldiers killed. So you should probably
you're going to have to send that resource to me, and I'm going to have to look into it because I didn't hear about that.
That was a long time ago. Yeah, it's curious that he used that, to be honest. But then Putin came back and told the U.S. to stay away. He said U.S. should stay away, quote, for their own good, which is interesting. Now, the flip side of it, you would think you'd hear a strong Biden response. The Biden administration then canceled the deployment of 2 U.S. warships to the Black Sea amid this troop buildup, which is very curious because why would you cancel warship deployments? Because when China picks stuff up, what do? We throw a carrier group into the South China Sea. So it's kind of opposite what we're doing. Now, granted, we respect Putin a little bit more, to be fair. But he also has Western values. So I think it's a little bit different there.
Yeah.
The reasoning is different. It's not like, you're not butting heads quite as much. It might be a little bit more subtle. But that's still a curious move. Why would Biden pull it out? If anything, I'd put more warships in, or at least amass more in the Mediterranean that could move over in kind of an instant. Russia also cut off. He closed the Kerch Strait between Crimea and mainland Russia, which blocks Black Sea access. So Ukraine sits on the north side of the Black Sea. Black Sea then empties into the Mediterranean. Most of the north side of the Black Sea is Ukraine, but half of that now is Russia-based Crimea. So half of their coastline is basically cut off. So that's an issue. And where we're at, I mean, it's a lot of harsh rhetoric, right?
Right. No, thank you for the great update on what's happening between Russia and Ukraine. So do you have any closing words on these issues?
Yeah, closing words. I just think it's very interesting. We saw during the Obama administration, right? We saw Russia kind of coming over and taking those parts of the Ukraine. During the Trump administration, we saw basically no Russian aggression. All their aggression was based in Syria, a lot of petroleum-based stuff, but based in Syria. And we saw the strikes on the air base at Shayrat in response to the chemical attack, but that was a Russian air base that they struck with those 50 cruise missiles. And then you also had the column of Russian mercenaries. Once again, they took their patches off and they were unmarked. They weren't officially Russian troops. So I guess Mattis had called and he said, hey, your troops are here. They're not supposed to cross the Euphrates and you're crossed. Can you call them back? And they're like, they're not our troops. And he's like, are you sure? And they're like, yep. And he's like, all right, cool. And he obliterated 100% casualties. So that's the most aggressive. That was the single most aggressive act towards Russia since, in decades and 50 years. I mean, so we really Trump really punched him in the face. So, I mean, for all the headway Biden seems to be making with China with specific items, I think the opposite's true with Russia. But he's using Russia as his boogeyman. Trump used China as his boogeyman. It's politics, right?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's interesting that you bring him up. Like you said, we have to have a boogeyman, right? So it was, our time is up for today, as we're always running out of time as we get into like our fun conversations, which is fine because we'll have stuff for next week. I don't have anything else to say, even though I kind of do. We don't have time.
We'll just say Jason, real quick.
I mean, it just has to do with like the Supreme Court and court packing. That's like a whole nother topic that
Yeah,
we're
we'll
going to
get to
say.
that next week.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
got some
We'll
time
save,
on that.
right. We'll save that for next week. So, or whenever, because that's going to be an ongoing issue. But other than that, I have no more
Yeah.
comments. Jason, go ahead.
Everybody, let us know on Twitter if there's something you want us to cover. We'll try to get to it. Leave a comment below. Let us know on Twitter. We'll cover it, see what our thoughts are at least. If we don't know, we might know.
Yeah, right. Twitter, or leave us a comment and we'll promise we'll get back to you. Other than that, we hope you come back next week. Next week, Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern, right here on Second Gen's Liberated Panda. Have a great day, guys. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.